Hi everybody, my name is Mark O'Reilly, founder of Fit Vision, and welcome to the recap video of the latest IBEC KeepWell Wellbeing Forum. Within this session, we discussed the role of wellbeing programs in terms of employee motivation. So where I would like to actually start in our session today is to look at the idea of employee wellbeing and look at it from a personal perspective. One thing that we use in Fit Vision is our wellness matrix, and we use this to help communicate what well-being might mean to us as individuals. This can be good for leaders and managers to understand maybe how some of their individual team members may conceptualize well-being. And as we can see here, what we call our 4x4 matrix is made up of our 4 key value areas at the bottom. This is namely our career, our relationships, our hobbies, our leisure time, and our personal development and health. And research shows us that these are our 4 key value areas where we get a sense of fulfillment and a sense of achievement. From the time that we wake up in the morning to the time that we go to bed at night, we are consciously and subconsciously performing goal-directed actions in these areas. When we hear employees talk about creating work-life balance, ultimately they may be feeling that they lack alignment across these 4 areas. And I'm sure that's something that you yourself will be able to empathize with. If we move to the areas at the top, the 4 wellness dimensions, namely we have physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional. And I'm sure throughout your own organizations, you're providing initiatives to help people build these wellness dimensions. The way we like to speak about them in Fit Vision is that they all contain skills that can be developed. If we think of the physical wellness dimension, a skill that we might develop there to benefit ourselves is the skill of regular activity. Or maybe it might be a good recovery process, like getting 7 to 8 hours sleep a night. If we look at the emotional wellness dimension, we might think of a skill being stress management. And then how do we encourage and help our employees build the skill of stress management? Because then what we do is we break it down to actions that we can take. And that's the way we view those wellness dimensions, skills and actions that everybody can develop. If we begin to take this matrix as a whole, we start to identify what well-being truly means to us on a personal level, but also how we can then relate to team members when we think of the importance of, say, creating a personal connection and the role that that plays in terms of our well-being. There are a lot of exercises you can do specifically with this 4x4 wellness matrix, and there's something we can go into at a later session. Next, what we're going to look at is we're going to specifically look at how we might evaluate employee motivation and what are really the constructs of motivation. Now we're going to move to look specifically at motivation in the workplace. And we're going to start this by looking at how we might evaluate employee motivation. And I'm sure you in your own organizations have many ways of doing this. It could be through one-to-one mentoring or coaching, or maybe internal surveys. If we look at evaluating, we generally can look across 4 main areas. And those areas, as we can see here coming up on screen, are engagement. So the energy and effort and initiative employees bring to their jobs. The level of job satisfaction we may be experiencing. The commitment in terms of maybe employees are going above and beyond within their roles, and also intention to quit. So what are the employee turnover rates like? Are we holding on to our key people? Because as we move on and as we look at CEOs and what they have said are the most important factors moving into the new year, and this is fantastic research that was actually done by IBEC themselves, we can see that from a CEO's perspective, the top priorities are talent attraction and retention. So are we holding on to our most important, our key people? The overall business environment. So are we creating a level of certainty for our employees, even though there is so much uncertainty surrounding us? And another one of the top 5 priorities was employee well-being. A key challenge identified by CEOs was the availability of specific skills and talent. So what we want to start looking at is how might a well-being program impact positively the motivation of our employees? How might, as we can see our slide again, how might a well-being program increase levels of engagement, levels of job satisfaction, commitment and intention to quit? And I think the best way to look at this is to ask yourself the question, who within my organization might have the biggest influence on all those 4 aspects for my key people? So take a moment to ask yourself, who has the biggest influence? And we're going to come back to this now in one moment. So I'm sure you all had a similar answer to that question. We are talking about our managers. And in a lot of ways, we can be talking about those middle managers, the individuals who really bridge the gap between the different levels within our organizations. And if we look at this in more detail, we can see recent research that was done by Gallup. And we can see that managers are accounting for up to 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores. So if I have a good manager, if I like my manager, I'm rating my employee engagement as quite high. But conversely, the same can be said if I have a bad manager. And we've often heard that individuals don't leave organizations, they actually leave managers. They leave ineffective managers. And if we bring this more to an academic standpoint for a moment, so let's look at some of the common theories around workplace motivation for a moment and just look at the manager's influence in terms of those theories. So the first theory that we have is self-determination theory. We can see obviously there's 3 constructs to this: autonomy, relatedness and competence. And if we think about our managers, there's no doubt that if I'm a team member, the level of autonomy that I feel will directly relate to the amount of responsibility I'm given within my role. And the same can be said for the level of competence, because that's based on maybe the feedback I'm receiving from that manager. And a lot of that can stem from the relationship that I may have with that manager. Relatedness as well, when we think about maybe the culture within the team, is that manager fostering a culture of well-being, of psychological safety? Because all of those things will increase my level of relatedness and ultimately increase the motivation that I feel. The second theory that we have is cognitive evaluation theory. And ultimately this looks at our internal and our external motivators, our intrinsic and extrinsic. And what we know from research is that yes, bonuses and money, they may motivate us in the short term, but the more we put the focus on external rewards, the less we begin to feel the internal rewards of maybe a job well done. So again, when we think about a manager and we think about motivating the group around us, are we focused solely on those external benefits, or are we starting to focus on the internal benefits? Maybe a job well done, or the satisfaction that I get in terms of personal growth within my role. And if we cast our mind briefly back to the 4x4 matrix, this was all encapsulated in that 4x4 matrix. The final theory that we're going to look at, because it does directly relate to motivation, managers, and well-being, is our dual factor theory. And this is where we ultimately are looking at, when it comes to job satisfaction, we're looking on one side at the key motivators. On the other side, we're looking at the key enablers. And when we think about a manager's role and where well-being might be concerned, we know that building that personal trust, that connection with team members, is obviously vitally important. And if we're thinking about the dual factor theory for a moment, one of the most motivating aspects that I can experience within my role is personal growth, knowing that I'm getting better as an individual. One of the key enablers to that is the feedback that I receive and the relationship that I have with my manager. All too often we can receive those performance reviews maybe once every quarter, but the workplace is changing. We need more than that quarterly performance review. It needs to be an ongoing conversation in order to increase our levels of well-being and motivation. And we're going to have a look at that now in a moment. Before we do, let's look at the future of work and how it might be changing. And I think this statement really encapsulates that. So we can see that individualizing performance is really paramount in terms of performance management in the future. And if we look at the emerging workplace expectations and how they're actually shifting, in the past, as we can see here, it may have focused on things like my paycheck, but now we can see it's built around purpose. The new generation stepping into the workforce want their values to really be aligned with the organization. If we look at things like my boss, we now see it's not so much my boss, but it's my coach. Managers and leaders are expected to be coaches to team members. And again, if we cast our mind back to that 4x4 matrix, opening up a conversation and having the skill to open up a conversation in that area is key for managers moving in to the future. It's something that we prioritize and focus on with our programs in Fit Vision. And again, just to highlight, we talked about it already, but the annual review is being replaced by ongoing conversations. It may still happen, but it's not the only thing that is helping us to evaluate or give feedback to team members. We're doing it on a regular basis in order to build that personal connection. And if we think now, as we look at connecting, well-being, the role of managers and motivation, by prioritizing good values around well-being and ensuring that well-being is represented within our teams on a weekly basis, what we ultimately achieve is the three things that we see next. When it's done effectively, we are building trust, we are enhancing personal connection, and we are creating what we call facilitative environments. A facilitative environment is where the level of challenge is matched by the level of support. And when I say support, I don't mean the nice supports that we may have on site within an organization, like free food in the canteen or even a nice gym on site. I mean the level of support that we actually feel is there from our managers, from our team members, and ensuring that we are aware of the additional supports, for example, like the EAP program that's potentially provided by our employer. And our managers and leaders have a role in obviously highlighting those services. But it's important that we continue to open up that conversation. If we bring it back for a moment to our 4x4 matrix, this is one way we actually coach leaders and managers to do this with team members. We might, for example, get them to evaluate their own 4 key value areas. What is the level of satisfaction they feel in terms of the time and attention that they devote to each of these areas? And what about looking at the satisfaction in terms of their progress? Are they satisfied with how they're progressing in these areas? And that simple exercise could potentially frame a performance feedback conversation. Again, it doesn't have to be quarterly or annually. That can be something that is maybe checked in on every month in terms of a team member and a manager. And there are other ways that we can check in terms of our well-being. For anybody who was on our live session, we used Mentimeter, a fantastic tool to check in with people's well-being. But next, what we're going to look at in a bit more detail are the aspects we need to help our managers and leaders focus on in order to build that trust, enhance the personal connection, and create those facilitative environments. So as we continue to move forward and we look at next steps, don't get me wrong, it's fantastic to have initiatives within the organization, whether it's free use of the gym facility or a lovely canteen on site which provides nutritious food. But these are all ancillaries to an effective well-being program. When we think of a well-being program and we cast our mind back to the manager's influence in this area, we need to be prioritizing our managers. We need to ensure, first of all, that our managers have an understanding of well-being. Again, thinking back to the 4x4 matrix, giving managers and leaders an understanding of those 4 key value areas, those 4 wellness dimensions, the skills that can be developed in those areas. Because we know from research that the next generation don't see that as a nice to have, they see it as a must-have as they step in to a new organization. So we need to bring our managers through programs to help them gain that knowledge and understanding. The second aspect is we need our managers to be good coaches. It's no longer good enough to have highly technically proficient managers and leaders that don't have the soft skills, as we may call them. We need our managers to be good coaches. So that might look like a manager actually doing a course in the area of coaching and obviously getting ongoing coaching themselves. And the final aspect, which is key to success in this area, is ensuring that our managers and leaders can facilitate this open dialogue. Think about your next team meeting. How do you start the team meeting? Is it straight into business speak? Or are we devoting time to checking in effectively with the group's well-being? As we mentioned, this can be done very simply by using a tool like Mentimeter. Or if you have a small team, you might do a quick round with the group just to see how everybody is doing. Never underestimate that quick check-in at the start. That's vitally important for your managers to pick up in terms of the climate currently within the team. When we think of culture, we may think of the whole organization. When we think of climate, we think of the small silos, the teams. What is the atmosphere like in those? And that responsibility falls on the managers. But we may reference something like the thinking environment from Nancy Klein. This is a great way to show managers and leaders how to facilitate that open dialogue. So to recap, when we think of well-being and the role that it plays in employee motivation, it directly relates to our managers within our organizations. But it's not enough just to place that responsibility on our managers. We have to educate our managers. Remember, they need the knowledge and understanding of well-being. They need the coaching skills to be able to keep that dialogue going, that ongoing feedback conversation with team members. And they also need the skills to facilitate that open dialogue, to increase the trust, to increase the levels of psychological safety. To conclude, I would just like to once again thank IBEC for the opportunity and inviting Fit Vision along as part of the IBEC KeepWell Wellbeing Forum. And if anything that I've said today has resonated with yourself, or you have any questions that you'd like to ask me, please feel free to get in touch with me directly at mark@fitvision.ie, and I look forward to hopefully working with some of your organisations in the future.